All right, so this is going to be the first type of macromolecule, okay, that we'll go into in detail on these notes. So carbohydrates, notice it just says equal sugars, so we tend to call carbohydrate sugars, just in layman's terms. Okay, let's look at what that word means though. Okay, so notice you've got the prefix carbon, okay, or carbo, right, so that deals with carbon. And then hydrate, right, is going to again deal with water. Right, so for autotrophs to build carbohydrates, they're going to combine carbon dioxide and water. Okay, and so when we go into our next unit, we're going to find that they are going to make glucose, which is a specific sugar made through the process of photosynthesis. Okay, so we're going to talk about this as just a basic chemical formula in just a second. All right, so all carbohydrates are made of only carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And they are always in this specific formula. Okay, so there's one carbon, two hydrogens, and one oxygen. Okay, is your basic general formula. This N stands for the number of carbons. Okay, so that being said, when plants are making glucose, glucose is C6H12O6. Okay. So again, the N is the number of carbons. So if there's 6 carbons, right, then there's going to be 12 hydrogens in glucose, because 6 times 2 is 12. And then there's going to be one, sorry, I didn't say about the implied one with the carbon, but there's an implied one with the carbon and with the oxygen, okay? And so 6 times 1 here with the oxygens as well. Okay, so glucose's chemical formula is C6H12O6. Well, plants are going to take, and other autotrophs, okay, anything that's autotrophic, right, is going to combine carbon dioxide and water, okay, and we'll talk about the chemical formula for photosynthesis in our next unit in order to make glucose, okay? So that's the sugar we're going to talk about the most. All right, so now we can see that their functionality, as far as what carbohydrates do, they're going to store and provide energy in the bodies of organisms. This is the body's first choice of fuel, okay? And that's going to be one thing that we're really going to harp on, right? So when you take in the foods that you eat, you're going to burn up carbohydrates first, okay? Specifically, you're going to burn monosaccharides first, okay? Mono, again, means one, okay? And saccharide refers to a sugar, okay? So all larger carbohydrates are built from monosaccharides, okay, and there's only a couple of monosaccharides in nature, okay, glucose, fructose, and galactose are all examples of monosaccharides, okay, so you're going to burn these up quick because they're small, okay. Once, and again, I'm couching a lot of this in terms of you and I strictly to make it a little bit more understandable, okay. Your next category of carbohydrates are disaccharides. Di means 2. Okay, so these are only 2 sugar molecules. So, for example, sucrose, which is table sugar, okay, that's a disaccharide. It's 2 monosaccharides put together. I'm going to pause for a second. All right, and some other disaccharides real quick. Lactose is a disaccharide that's milk sugar. Maltose, okay, which is malt sugar. And I mentioned sucrose already, which is table sugar. Okay, so then we get to what are called polysaccharides. So in this case, let's just go with that poly is going to mean many, because di meant 2, okay, for disaccharides. So these are going to be large sugars, okay? They're going to provide us with more energy than do monosaccharides or disaccharides. So again, first you're going to break down monosaccharides, then you would burn any disaccharides that you had in your body, okay, like if you've taken in some lactose, drinking some milk, right, and then you're going to burn polysaccharides. Okay, examples. Starch is one that you probably, to be quite frank, eat pretty much every day. Okay, so it's a food storage product in plants, like in carrots, for example, because those are tap roots. That's a starch storage organ. Right, glycogen. This is a storage molecule for sugars, essentially. Okay, it's a storage molecule in our bodies, right, and it's stored specifically in order to eventually kind of power muscle contraction and some other functions. We don't get into that too much, okay? Cellulose, this one we do talk about in this class more. This is what forms the cell walls of plant cells. It's what makes plant cell walls rigid and tough, right? Animals, we do not digest cellulose, but we have to have it in our diets to help to digest and eliminate waste, Okay, so this is known as fiber. This is what helps you defecate or poop. Okay, so it helps to easily or make food move through the digestive tract more easily, right? And we'll talk about that when we talk about plant function as well. Okay, but so this is another one we spend a little bit of time on. And then chitin, this forms the cell wall of fungal cells and the exoskeleton of arthropods. So if you eat mushrooms, for example, or if you've ever eaten one, even if you don't like them, they're kind of chewy, and it gives the fungal cell wall a chewy texture. But then with the exoskeleton of an arthropod, okay, an exo means outside, okay, or external, right? So they have an exoskeleton where we have an endoskeleton, okay, all of our bones, right? But think of a roach. If you step on a roach, then it's going to crunch. That's because you hear the chitinous exoskeleton of that insect when it breaks, right, if you step on it. So notice I'm saying chitin, okay? It's kind of like kite with an N on it if you were going to go fly a kite, right? That's the pronunciation for that. The next slide, although this is not big enough to be starch, let's look at this. Okay, so you got to picture tons more glucose molecules to actually make starch. So, but this is a small diagram out of an old textbook. So this is a single glucose molecule. Notice it says monomer, super complicated within itself, okay, as far as the chemical structure of that. So if you were going to burn this as a monomer, all of the bonds that we see here are going to break down in your body when you're digesting that, and you're going to release energy in the form of ATP to power your daily activities. That's coming as far as what I just said, as far as powering activities and what ATP is, right? If you take in starch, let's say you ate some carrots in the slide up above, or you ate some potatoes, right? Something that's pasta, rice, bread, things that most people know are kind of starchy foods. Right, first what your body is going to do is through the process of hydrolysis, it's going to break apart all of these bonds by putting waters in between each of those monomers and breaking those bonds. Digestive enzymes are going to play a role as well. Again, we're getting to enzymes. Then once you have those individual glucose molecules, you're going to break down each of those, okay? So it takes our bodies longer to break down a polysaccharide than it does a monosaccharide, okay? And so then also as a result of that, because these are larger molecules, we have more stored energy present in polysaccharides than we do monosaccharides, okay? So first we're going to burn monosaccharides, then we're going to burn disaccharides, then we're going to burn polysaccharides, okay? It gives us fuel for longer, okay? And then I'm going to pause for a second, and then we'll go from there with lipids. All right, so once you've burned up, again, couching this in terms of you to make it a little bit easier to understand. Once you've burned up all of your carbohydrate stores, then you would switch to what's called lipid metabolism. Okay, and we're, again, our next unit's going to be where we're talking about this a little bit more. Okay, so lipids, they are again made of only carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, but they do not have that 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. Okay, and I just realized I didn't give you some other examples besides glucose. So let's say, for example, you had, just to kind of throw this back in there, that you had 8 carbons, you would have C8H16O8 for a carbohydrate, okay? We already said C6H12O6 for glucose, right? That would be another carbohydrate. Lipids don't have that 1 to 2 to 1 ratio, okay? It varies. I'm not going to get into why because we don't have to use it. Fats, oils, waxes, cholesterol is a lipid, chlorophyll is a lipid. This is going to be the molecule that we're going to see, and you might want to jot this down here, but that's going to be present in the chloroplast. This is a pigment that's going to trap sunlight to drive the process of photosynthesis. Okay, so now we're going back to properties of water here. So lipids are nonpolar, as we've already talked about with oil, for example, so they do not dissolve in water. Okay, so as we use this information all year long, there's going to be some things that we're going to pull back to with this. Okay, functionality in organisms. They're going to be a long-term energy storage molecule. They're going to play a role just in general in our metabolic reactions. They're going to insulate, okay, and they're going to serve as protective coverings. So when we get to kind of our final unit for this semester, we're going to include the structure of the plasma membrane and the importance of the plasma membrane in maintaining homeostasis. The plasma membrane is full of lipid, okay? The monomers of the category of lipids that we are going to focus on are glycerol and 3 fatty acids. okay? So when you look at this diagram, this green, this is your glycerol, right? And then these three red things, these are your fatty acids. Okay, now, that being said, on this particular diagram, you have the same fatty acid in all three locations on the glycerol backbone. There are other fatty acids, okay, that don't look exactly like that from a chemical structure standpoint, okay? So again, when you're finished burning up carbohydrates, lipids are your second choice of fuel, okay? And again, you see some of your functions there, and so this will be some things that we've got coming soon as far as chlorophyll, protective coverings, and some things like that, okay? And we've already talked about the fact that they're nonpolar. Let me pause for a minute. All right, so now we're going to see that our third category of macromolecule is a protein. Okay, notice now we've got carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen present in all proteins. As important as carbohydrates and lipids are in our bodies, proteins do everything, okay? So proteins are made of monomers that are called amino acids. There are 20 amino acids in nature, right? And so notice it says that there are more types of proteins than any other macromolecule because there are so many amino acids, right? If we go back for just a second to lipids, and we're talking about monomers of glycerol and 3 fatty acids, there's not a ton of variety in nature in the grand scheme of things, okay, with lipids. And really with carbohydrates, there's not either, okay? But when we look at protein structure, right, there are so many proteins in nature because of the fact that there are 20 amino acids, okay? And again, we'll talk about just how we build tons of different polymers from only a few monomers, okay, eventually. Functionality, again, as far as in the bodies of organisms, proteins do everything, okay? So that's what letter A says. They are going to code for genetic traits. We will tie this to DNA and RNA, okay, which are your 2 nucleic acids. If it's a structure in the body of an organism, it's going to build an organism, or sorry, it's going to be built of proteins, okay? Now, I shouldn't have enzymes listed there, is kind of what just threw me, right? Because enzymes are not structural, right? But for you, your hair, your muscles, the collagen in your skin, okay, that keeps your skin nice and firm in youth, and that as collagen starts to break down as you age, that's what forms wrinkles, okay, is that protein breaking down. Your tendons and your ligaments and your bones, okay? Everything else that builds a structure in our bodies, when we're talking at a cellular level too, it's all built of protein. Okay, and then I gave you just one example, the spider web. Okay, all of the structure of a spider web that you can see there, that's built of protein. Okay, I'm going to give you examples just so you kind of know the difference in a tendon and a ligament since I mentioned them here. So this is a picture of the wrist ligaments right here. Okay, and I know this is kind of tiny. These bones right here are in the palm of your hand. Those are your metacarpals. And then all of the bones out here are your phalanges, which make up your fingers, okay? The white structures that are attaching those bones to each other, those are ligaments. Tendons attach muscles to bones. So the red here is muscle, and then you've got bones. This is of the forearm. That's humerus, and then this is the radius and the ulna. Okay, so this is the biceps muscle group. This is something obviously that we talk about in anatomy, okay? And then bones themselves are full of proteins as well. Enzymes are actually functional proteins, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute too, okay? This double asterisk should really be like a big asterisk, even more asterisks, okay? So because of the roles that proteins play in our bodies, we do not want to metabolize them, okay? This is our last choice of fuel. Essentially, the body's desperate if we're breaking down protein, okay? And I mean even like if we're talking about an animal out in nature, their body's desperate if they're breaking down protein. So that might mean that there's a shortage of food, or for us, somebody that's food insecure, that's truly starving. Maybe somebody that has an eating disorder, okay, being anorexic and not consuming enough calories, okay, to sustain the body structures of the person themselves, are also binging and purging, being bulimic. Okay, that's going to shift somebody into burning their own proteins, okay, that build their bodies. So we tend to see like dry hair that breaks easily, fingernails are kind of break easily and are dry and whatnot as well. Skin might be kind of sallow and not have a lot of color to it, and then muscles will actually atrophy as well, which means that they're going to get smaller in size if somebody's, again, not taking enough protein. This picture right here of these steaks, to mention that, so the white, you probably already know that's fat, so that's a lipid, and then all of the red tissue, if you eat a steak, that's muscle. If you eat a chicken breast, you're eating, that muscle is protein. Okay, if you eat a chicken breast, that's protein. Right, this particular slide will talk a little bit more about enzyme function and some other things that are on here in another lecture, pretty much in class, unless something changes for some reason. So you can see it says most abundant organic compound in the human body specifically. It's going to build structural things, whether we're talking about the cellular level all the way up to our whole body. It's going to allow for contractile movement of our muscles, transport proteins in your own body, so as things are moving around the body, it's because of proteins. Buffers, we don't get into that a ton, but just as far as when we do talk about pH, okay, protein's going to play a role in that. We keep that pretty simple. Enzymes, we're about to talk about a tiny bit more, and then we'll do a whole separate lecture and class on that most likely. But notice it says that they speed up the rate of chemical reactions. Basically, if we didn't have enzymes, then chemical processes that happen in bodies would not happen at the rate at which they do. Hormones are proteins, okay, so they control all sorts of functions in our body. Important for defensive, not mechanisms, but defense in the body, playing a role in the immune system, for example. Okay, and then you've got some other things listed there, just skin, hair, and nails, antibodies that protect us from disease, clotting proteins, okay, when your blood clots. And then this slide right here, I'm going to keep this short and simple for today, and then again we're going to go into enzymes more with some other notes. But again, enzymes are going to act as what are called catalysts to speed up the rate of chemical reactions. So they are specifically biological catalysts, right? And I already said this, that in some cases, essentially, a chemical reaction would occur very differently if we did not have an enzyme present. So we will end up talking about this diagram. It's super important. We'll talk about this diagram more. It's super important. But I want to just show you here. These are individual amino acids being shown as those different colored dots, right? They're going to join together to make what's called a polypeptide. And I'm going to write that here. Okay, because the bonds, let me pause for a second. All right, so this is going to be an example of what's called a polypeptide. So there's 9 amino acids in that sequence, if you count all the little dots, which means that there are 8 different bonds that are specifically called peptide bonds to make this polypeptide. And that's just a section of it. This red structure is one polypeptide. The blue structure is another polypeptide, and those are sequences of amino acids. And when they get stuck together, that's one particular protein, okay? And so when you go back up to this picture, proteins always have this, basically it makes me think of curling ribbon, that when you grab the ribbon with the scissors and you run the scissors along it, it makes it curl up even tighter. That's kind of what it makes me think of, okay? So this is going to be some particular protein in the body. It doesn't really matter what it is. And then let's say that we just had a slight difference, like that this red polypeptide, okay, wasn't there, then that's a totally different protein, okay? So again, more to come on that concept too. All right, so then the last category of macromolecules, this is nucleic acids. There's only 2 types of nucleic acids in the body, DNA and RNA. And we actually don't do much with DNA and RNA until second semester. So we're going to keep this pretty simple for now. We're going to use carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins essentially from this point on this semester, even in some different ways. Okay, so notice with nucleic acids, now we've got carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and now we're adding phosphorus, okay? So if you think about that, we talked about the carbon cycle. Hydrogen and oxygen together make up water, so we talked about the water cycle, talked about the nitrogen cycle, and then we talked about the phosphorus cycle, all right? So that is why when we can say everything's connected, that I'm going to keep saying that to you, okay? When we look at the molecular level, which is what we're doing now, and then we can tie that to carbon, water, nitrogen, and phosphorus moving through the cycles that we see pictures out in the ecosystem of, and we talk about with ecosystem movement of matter. This is part of the reason we're doing that. Okay, so nucleic acids, they're going to store hereditary information in a code that's used to make new proteins. Right, so the monomers are called nucleotides. Okay, so a nucleotide is made of three things. It's made of a sugar that's shaped like a pentagon. It's made of a phosphate group, which phosphate is 1 phosphorus and 4 oxygen, so it's PO4. And then it's made of a base, right? The base is either going to have a single ring structure to it or a double ring structure. Again, we'll get into that more next semester though. Okay, DNA and RNA. So DNA is in the nucleus of the cell, right? And I'm going to put this here, and hopefully we know that already. But we're going to get into cell structure here. It's going to code for all of our genetic traits, and it's also going to control all cell functions. Okay, DNA is going to be a template, and from that DNA template, RNA is going to be made. Okay, then RNA is going to be used to make proteins. Right, and that's again basically all I'm going to say about this for now, because we'll cover this more next semester. All right, so this slide here, this says within each of the 4 categories of macromolecules, so carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids, there are many polymers in nature. Okay, there are only a few monomers within each category. Proteins, we've got the most monomers though. So remember, we've got the most variety in nature within that category. The others, all 3, less variety because there are fewer monomers, right? Let's see, so all of those handful of monomers essentially are the 20 amino acids and proteins. Those are going to be used to build all of the polymers within that category. So the type of monomer can change, the order of the monomer can change, and the number of the monomers joined together within a polymer can change. Those 3 just kind of big concepts are what could produce so many polymers in nature with only a few monomers. Okay, so I want you to think about some analogies. All right, so I know this was kind of long. Again, this is just kind of tricky for people, and you got to kind of wrap your brain around it a little bit. I'm going to leave off more discussion of enzymes at this point. Like I said, that will probably be a lecture in class, so there's a lot more to come on that. For this, let me know if you have any questions.